The city that never sleeps, New York City, glittering, untamed, always awake, served as the restless backdrop to Emily Madison's privileged world. For as long as she could remember, life had unfolded among the soaring skyscrapers of Manhattan, their 1,000 windows, each twinkling with promises and secrets. By day, Emily's world swirled with brunches at glass-walled penthouses, the soft rumble of Blacktown cars, and the constant drone of ambition that seemed to vibrate through the city's worn concrete veins. Central Park's leafy calm and Fifth Avenue's electric chaos shaped her childhood. In the mornings, she jogged past dog walkers and street musicians, her breath fogging in the crisp light. The city was a mosaic of diversity and opportunity, where Wall Street titans brushed past graffiti artists, and dreams could morph into nightmares with the turn of a corner. For the Madisons, one of New York's wealthiest families, appearances mattered as much as pedigree. Designer performances in charity galas and exclusive events were as much a part of Emily's upbringing as quiet family dinners in their Park Avenue brownstone. But New York did not grant privacy easily. Its lights burrowed into every shadow, and its people had a way of seeing everything. Beneath the perfection of their social media posts and magazine spreads, rumors about the Madisons swirled like the Hudson in a storm. In this city, without secrets, wealth was both armor and target, an invisible currency that protected, tempted, and betrayed. Emily had learned early that New York's magic never dimmed, but it demanded its own kind of sharpness. Nights stretched endlessly, lit with the competing glow of ambition and desire, lulled to sleep by the distant wail of sirens and the laughter echoing through canyons of glass and steel. Emily felt both safe and haunted, knowing that behind every golden promise of the city, something darker lurked, waiting, as patient as the city itself, until the time was right to emerge. Emily, the overlooked daughter, unlike her glamorous older sister or her impeccably poised stepmother, Emily had always drifted along the periphery of the Madison family's spotlight. She was the youngest, the one everyone described as sweet but sheltered, an afterthought in designer hand-me-downs at benefit galas, her laughter softer and presence quieter, always a few steps behind the glittering social parade. While Andrea commanded attention with quick wit and calculated charm, and Evelyn ruled the house with icy efficiency, Emily often melted into the background, watching, absorbing, learning from a world that rarely gave her credit. In the echoing halls of their Park Avenue brownstone, Emily's ideas were dismissed politely or ignored altogether. Family dinners became theater. Andrea and Evelyn exchanged knowing glances over gourmet plates, while Emily's gentle suggestions floated away, unacknowledged. To them, she was too naive, too untested by the real currents of power that surged through Manhattan's elite circles. Her softness was mistaken for weakness, her kindness for ignorance. At private schools and debutante parties, rumors sometimes buzzed behind raised champagne flutes. Emily's cute, but you know she could never handle the Madison legacy. Not like Andrea. Even within her own home, Evelyn would gently chide, "You have to be a little tougher if you want to survive in this family, darling," never quite hiding the dismissiveness in her eyes. Andrea's encouragement came laced with barbs, so subtle that Emily sometimes wondered if she imagined the sting. Yet, in that neglect, a certain freedom emerged. Because those around her discounted her, Emily became a silent observer, watching the games, the whispered conspiracies, the deals made behind closed doors. She listened, unnoticed, at doorways and along echoing marble corridors. The label of innocent bystander granted her a vantage point her family never suspected. She saw not only their ambition and pretenses, but also the small betrayals, the cracks in their perfect facade. Still, she yearned for connection, a sense of belonging within her own family, a place not awarded through cunning, but earned through sincerity. Each slight, each dismissive word made her more sensitive to the pain of others and quietly resilient. While Manhattan's upper crust wrote Emily off as a naive rich girl out of her depth, they missed the unfolding truth. Sometimes, the ones you underestimate are the ones you should fear the most. And beneath Emily's gentle exterior, anger and determination began to simmer, just waiting for the right moment to step into the light. The betrayal. It happened on one of those muggy summer evenings in New York, where the city's shimmering energy had begun tapering into shadows. The Madison brownstone, always immaculate, seemed even quieter than usual. Emily moved softly down the wide marble staircase, the banister cool beneath her fingertips, the distant sound of traffic like a lullaby beyond the triple-pane windows. She was looking for a book she'd left in the downstairs library, wanting a bit of escape from the forced pleasantries of another family dinner. The voice she heard outside the library door stopped her mid-step. Low, clipped, unmistakably Andrea's. Emily would have headed back up the stairs, except Evelyn's voice, sharp as glass, sliced through the thick air. There was an urgency, a secrecy, that made Emily's skin prickle with unease. She stood, invisible in the soft pool of light at the end of the hallway, her heart beginning to tap a nervous rhythm against her ribs. For a fleeting moment, she hesitated. Listening in on her family's private conversation felt wrong. But in the Madison house, secrets were currency, and Emily had spent too long bankrupt. Peeking through the narrow space where the oak doors didn't quite close, she watched as Andrea and Evelyn stood in the golden lamplight, heads bent close together over a sheaf of papers. "I told you, it's all set. Once Dad finalizes the documents, it's ours," Andrea whispered, her voice flinty with ambition. Evelyn's reply came with a hiss. "She's never going to see it coming. That sweet little idiot actually trusts us." For a long moment, Emily didn't process what she was hearing. There was a shuffling of papers, the clink of ice in Evelyn's cut glass tumbler. Her trust fund, the stocks, everything. "It'll be in our names before she even knows what happened," Andrea continued, a wicked curl in her tone. "By the time she realizes, the lawyers will be ours too." Evelyn smirked, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "You know your father only kept that provision in the will for her out of guilt. If he knew how useless she was, he'd have left it all to you." It felt as if the warmth had drained from Emily's body, leaving her hollow and cold. The people she had always wanted to please, whose approval she had craved like oxygen, were plotting to take everything that rightfully belonged to her. Worse, they had spent years hiding behind polished smiles and patronizing pats on the head, lulling her into believing in a version of family that had never truly existed. A rush of humiliation surged through her, hot and suffocating. How many family dinners had Andrea and Evelyn spent quietly mocking her while she laughed along, eager to belong, each memory replayed with a new edge. She imagined all the times she'd confided in Evelyn, only to be met with empty reassurances. The sisterly advice Andrea offered felt suddenly like poison, disguised as concern. But beneath the cold, a new resolve began to take root. All her years of being overlooked, dismissed, underestimated, if they thought that made her weak, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Emily didn't move. She pressed herself to the wall, listening as the plotting continued. Details about forged signatures, a secret meeting with a family attorney, even plans to isolate her if she questioned them. Their words laid everything bare, not only the theft, but the total lack of remorse. She backed away from the door, each footstep as silent as snowfall, her mind whirring at a dizzying speed. She clenched her fists so tightly, her nails cut into her palms, focusing on the small jolt of physical pain to ground herself. It was almost laughable. Andrea and Evelyn hadn't even checked if anyone was nearby. They were so convinced she was harmless, so sure their little project would go unnoticed. Upstairs, the familiar expanse of her bedroom, once a sanctuary, now felt close and stifling. She let herself collapse onto the window seat, forcing slow, measured breaths as anger and betrayal roiled within her. What would her father think if he were still alive? Grief, sharp and sudden, mingled with fresh determination. Emily realized she could either become the victim they thought she was, or she could use their arrogance against them. She remembered the countless times her teachers had told her she had a knack for seeing what others missed. Small details, hidden motives, subtle shifts in body language. Maybe for once, being underrated could be her advantage. That night, the Madison penthouse glimmered as usual, softly lit and filled with the scent of fresh lilies. But for Emily, the cityscape was irrevocably changed. Every shimmering window she looked out upon seemed to flicker with secrets like hers. For the next few days, Emily went through the motions. Brunches with her mother, yoga with Andrea, polite nods at the staff. Every smile she offered was a shield, every word chosen with the utmost care. She felt herself learning, adapting, watching more carefully than ever before. Each time Andrea or Evelyn glanced her way, they looked through her, oblivious to the possibility that she might have heard everything. Emily waited until a quiet Sunday before taking action. She disappeared into a downtown cafe, phone trembling in her hands, and did what the old Emily would never have considered. She researched private investigators, reading reviews, and cross-checking credentials, with a focus sharpened by fear and fury. She jotted down names and numbers, each keystroke an act of rebellion. When she finally reached Jack, the ex-cop with a reputation for never backing down from a corrupt case, she felt an unfamiliar thrill of control. Their conversation was brief, but decisive. Jack's gruff assurances were a lifeline. Emily knew she was swimming with sharks, but for the first time, she also knew she wasn't alone. Coming home that evening, the city's neon glow shone sharper than ever. Emily caught her reflection in a boutique window, chin strong, eyes clear. It occurred to her that the sweet little idiot she'd heard Evelyn jeer about was gone. In her place stood someone the Madison family had never truly seen. As she ascended the brownstone steps, head held high, she carried within her a secret of betrayal uncovered and a storm quietly gathering. The city that never slept pulsed beneath her feet, holding its breath along with her. From this night forward, the game had changed. Emily Madison was ready to fight. The plan unfolds. In the days that followed her life-altering discovery, Emily moved with an ice-cold calm that surprised even herself. Rage and humiliation never broke through her composed exterior. Instead, they settled somewhere deep within, transforming into a razor-sharp resolve. For years, everyone had underestimated her. Her sharpness, her memory for detail, her capacity for patience. Now, Emily realized, those overlooked qualities would be her most effective weapons. The world outside her windows whirled with autumn's gold and copper. But inside the Madison brownstone, everything was colder, quieter. Andrea and Evelyn barely noticed the change in Emily. They assumed her predictability, thinking she would bear slights with her usual quiet grace, that she was still the innocent little sister, oblivious to the undercurrent of greed. They continued their routines. Andrea, with her endless invitations and networking. Evelyn lording over staff and social calendars as always. Neither suspected that Emily's mild smile had become a mask. Emily knew she couldn't confront them directly. That would only tip them off and give them time to cover their tracks. She needed to build a case as airtight as the windows that sealed her off from the Manhattan street noise. Late at night, with the city lights flickering across her ceiling, she studied law articles, inheritance cases, and the technical language woven into trusts and wills. The legal world, with its loopholes and technicalities, intimidated her at first. But like everything she'd learned as the overlooked daughter, Emily adapted fast. She spent hours in her father's old study, searching through documents with trembling but determined hands.
Everything you need?
Every
Yes,
folder
thank
she
you.
touched was a link to his memory, a man she'd loved, whose absence now echoed through the house. With time, she learned to decipher his notes, the legal jargon, the careful signature marks. Eventually, she began to see a path. If she could gather proof of Andrea and Evelyn's intent, if she could tie them to financial misconduct, the law would protect her, even if her family would not. Her next move required a leap she'd never taken before, trusting an outsider. After days scrolling through private investigator listings, cross-referencing names and reading reviews until her vision blurred, Emily zeroed in on Jack Frawley. He was nothing like the men who came to her mother's dinner parties. No expensive suits, no polished charm. Jack was a retired NYPD detective who did freelance PI work out of a second-floor walk-up in Brooklyn. His reputation was for honesty, discretion, and an uncanny ability to find the truth in tightly closed cases. It took a full morning to summon the courage to call him. Her fingers hovered over the number, hesitated, then pressed call. The line buzzed. Then a gravelly voice answered. Frawley. His straightforward tone made Emily's rehearsed speech unnecessary. She stumbled at first, but Jack cut through her nervousness with short, reassuring questions. He knew the city's shadows. He believed her story. He agreed to meet the next afternoon in a busy cafe in Soho, where no one would associate a rich girl with a man like him. Their meeting was
was right
awkward at
there.
first. Emily kept her sunglasses on, hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup. Jack, broad-shouldered and slightly rumpled in a worn leather jacket, slipped a notebook across the table. He asked his questions quietly. Finances, access, who was involved, what she suspected. She answered him with growing confidence, laying out details only an ignored observer could. Remember, the names of lawyers, dates of strange meetings, inconsistencies in her father's will, the overheard promises made in the darkness of the library. Jack listened intently, pausing only to ask the kind of questions her family never had. Genuine and precise. When she finished, he leaned in. You did the right thing, kid. You're no fool. They made a mistake underestimating you. It was the first time someone had spoken to her without condescension. He sketched a plan. He'd pull financial records, leverage contacts at banks downtown, dig into Evelyn's business partners and Andrea's recent charity transactions. Most importantly, he'd work quietly. Any slip could put Andrea and Evelyn on alert, ruining everything. Back at home, Emily began to weave her own web. She became a model of normalcy, tagging Andrea in brunch selfies, complimenting Evelyn's garden club awards, sitting quietly at family dinners. Each interaction was laced with an inner irony. She now saw their ambitions in every gesture, heard threats in every syllable. She double-checked her phone for bugs, swapped out her computer for a new device Jack had insisted she buy. She started hiding her research in innocuous files, saved photos of vacation spots were really scanned financial statements. Travel itineraries were records of Andrea's secret meetings. Meanwhile, Jack sent daily texts in code. Skies blue today meant progress. Rain forecasted warned of delays. Emily found herself growing braver. Small acts of rebellion felt revolutionary. She set up lunch, dates, with family acquaintances, slyly probing for rumors or inconsistencies about Andrea's and Evelyn's spending. She slipped into her stepmother's office under the guise of borrowing stationery and photographed receipts for expensive artwork, foreign wire transfers, all while maintaining her harmless girl act. As weeks passed, Jack's findings grew more detailed and more damning. Andrea had funneled money from Madison charities into shell companies, and Evelyn's investments were fronts for laundering funds through offshore accounts. Jack traced illegal transfers and shady deals, snapped photos of confidential files, and quietly recorded meetings from a distance. Evidence that would be irrefutable in court. Each piece gave Emily a perverse sense of justice. For once, she had the upper hand, not through force or power, but through patience and clarity. Emily kept her composure, even while watching Andrea and Evelyn organize a grand holiday gala meant to celebrate family legacy. She smiled at guests, accepted compliments, and laughed at jokes. All the while, she was one step ahead, quietly coordinating with Jack, who moved among the waitstaff, gathering whispered secrets from tipsy guests. On the eve before everything would break open, Emily sat at her father's old desk, reading the final report Jack had sent. Her hands trembled, but her heart was steady. The evidence was airtight. Accounts, photos, bank statements, the kind of truth that shattered reputations. Her father's portrait looked down at her. For the first time, Emily didn't feel alone. She closed her eyes and pictured what tomorrow would bring. Justice, at last, for her, and for the Madison name her father had tried to protect. She turned off the lamp and looked out over the thrum of New York. The city no longer felt suffocating. In the darkness, Emily Madison smiled, a private, knowing smile. The plan was complete. The game was still ongoing, but now it was being played entirely by her rules. Revealing the truth. The day the truth came to light was one of those rare New York mornings that dawned clear and relentless, brushing gold across steel and glass. Emily rose before the sun, the city still heavy with sleep. Though she'd barely closed her eyes, her thoughts spun with strategy and fear, not just for herself, but for the Madison name her father had always protected so fiercely. She would have given anything to ask his advice, to hear him tell her she was doing the right thing. But all she had now was her own reflection, steadied by the memories of all he'd tried to teach her about strength and character. By 8, Jack had already sent her a text. "It's time. Call when you're ready." Emily's heart hammered so hard, she was worried Andrea and Evelyn might somehow hear it through the walls. Gone was the invisible, naive little sister. In her place stood a young woman, armoring herself with determination threaded through with grief. She pulled on a tailored navy dress, a subtle nod to confidence and professionalism, and double-checked the brown envelope stuffed into her purse. Inside were the documents that could change everything. Bank statements tracing the flow of stolen money, photographs of clandestine meetings, audio clips of whispered conspiracies, and records of the shell companies and offshore accounts Jack had traced. For someone used to watching drama unfold from the sidelines, Emily felt like she was stepping onto a different stage. One with real, lasting consequences. Downstairs, the kitchen buzzed with the efficiency only a well-trained staff could manage. Andrea and Evelyn were finishing their coffee, eyes glued to competing headlines on their tablets. Andrea barely glanced up. "Morning, Em. Big plans today?" she asked, with practiced nonchalance. Emily smiled, her face a mask of sweetness. "Nothing out of the ordinary, just errands." Evelyn, eyes cool and calculating, gave a chilly nod in response. The familiarity of their dismissal only fueled Emily's resolve. Jack had arranged every detail. Instead of walking to the subway like she usually did to avoid suspicion, Emily slipped out the back and into a waiting car. Jack sat behind the wheel, a disposable coffee cup in hand. "You sure you're ready?" he rumbled, eyes still fixed on the mirror. Emily nodded. "I'm done being a bystander." For the first time, the corners of Jack's mouth twitched into a proud, brief smile. Their first stop, the office of Charles Mendez, the family attorney entrusted with the Madison trusts since her father's era. Mendez, a man as famous for his discretion as for his love of orderly paperwork, greeted Emily with a measure of surprise. When he saw Jack accompanying her, his expression flickered from cordial to wary. Emily opened the meeting by carefully stating her position and the evidence she'd collected. She laid out records, deceptively simple at first, then building layer by layer. Jack handled the more damning evidence with detached professionalism, narrating the paper trail that linked Andrea and Evelyn to theft, misappropriation, even criminal conspiracy. At first, Mendez listened with polite disbelief. But as Emily presented the hard evidence, signed documents, bank ledgers, transaction codes, his composure cracked. "Emily, these are very serious allegations," he muttered, brows knit with concern. She met his gaze and didn't flinch. "I want everything stopped. I want the courts notified, in an injunction on any further transfers until this is sorted. And I want a full audit by your office. Today." The tension in the room was electric. Mendez, realizing he had no choice but to act, excused himself to make calls. First to freeze the accounts, then to alert law enforcement and the court. Emily sat with her hands in her lap, trembling but resolute. She had crossed a line, and there would be no turning back. By noon, police and financial investigators were descending on the Madison home, not with sirens, but with warrants and folded suits, their movements precise and unhurried. Emily, escorted by Jack and Mendez's assistant, returned to witness the storm she had summoned. Evelyn met them at the threshold, lips tight, Andrea trembling, but trying to brazen it out. "What's the meaning of this, Emily?" Evelyn hissed, her voice icy enough to chill the air around her. Emily's answer, a simple, firm, "Ask the police." The living room, customarily a place for diplomatic conversations and empty affections, suddenly felt like a stage for a reckoning years in the making. The next hours passed in a blur. Andrea's shrieks alternated with denials and outbursts of feigned innocence. Evelyn switched from outrage to pleading, trying to intimidate first Mendez, then the officers, then Emily herself. But the evidence was overwhelming. Phone records, signatures, emails, coded wire transfers, even captured conversations. Jack had left nothing to chance. When it was time for her statement, Emily spoke with the kind of controlled eloquence she'd always admired in others. She explained what she'd heard, how the evidence had piled up, how every attempt to reach out to her family had been met with scorn or silence, and how she decided to act, not just for herself, but for the legacy her father had hoped to leave behind. It was not a private affair for long. News vans gathered outside by evening, rumor and speculation spreading like wildfire. Somewhere in New York, strangers were already debating the downfall of the Madisons, dissecting every public image and magazine spread they'd created. But Emily was too spent to care about reputation. As night fell, she retreated to her childhood room, now strangely unfamiliar in the wake of all she had set in motion. She looked over the city, lights shimmering, and let herself feel the grief she'd locked away. She had wanted justice, not revenge. But in the end, they had given her no choice. At midnight, Jack called to check in. "You did good, kid. If your dad could see you now, I reckon he'd be proud." Emily let herself believe it, just for a moment. For the first time in a long while, she slept, not as a shadow trailing the powerful, but as someone who had learned to wield her own strength. Down on the street, New York kept moving, its own beat, restless and relentless. But Emily Madison was not the girl she'd been. The truth, once hidden in corners, now stood in the light, irrepressible. Whatever came next, she would meet it on her own terms, upright and unafraid, the true heir her father had always hoped she might one day become. The family trial. The day the Madison family's secrets were dragged into the cold, impartial light of a courtroom was as grim and dramatic as any Manhattan winter. The courthouse itself stood like a sentinel on Center Street, its marble steps swarmed by press and onlookers eager to witness the fall of one of New York's most illustrious families. Inside, the air felt charged, buzzing with whispered speculation and electric with the knowledge that masks would finally shatter. Emily arrived early, flanked by Jack and her attorney, a savvy woman named Felicia Park, who specialized in high-profile estate disputes. She wore black, the color of resolve, not mourning, her posture tall, face composed into an unreadable calm. Each step echoed in the marble hallway, but her mind was clearer than it had ever been. This was the day she fought not only for justice, but for the dignity her father's name deserved. In contrast, Andrea swept in, designer sunglasses trembling in her manicured hand, defiance clinging to her like perfume. Evelyn trailed close behind, her cool surface now cracked, eyes ringed with sleepless nights, voice only a whisper of its former authority. Their entourage, family lawyers, publicists, even a private security guard, followed them with a gravity befitting royalty on the edge of abdication. The judge, a formidable woman with a reputation for intolerance toward theatrics, called the hearing to order. Cameras were barred from the courtroom, but nothing could muffle the tension. Reporters crowded the lobby, updating social media feeds as insiders, and legal analysts speculated from afar. Felicia began the opening statement for Emily, weaving together a narrative that was both personal and precise. She detailed how Emily had been sidelined and underestimated, her inherited trust and shares targeted by those meant to shield her. Exhibits, sourced from Jack's investigation, streamed onto a projector. Bank records showing illegal transfers, correspondence uncovered between Andrea and Evelyn, even audio snippets that exposed the planning of their betrayal. As this court will see, Felicia concluded, her tone unwavering, these actions were not the result of a family misunderstanding. They were a willful and systematic theft, conceived and covered up only because Miss Madison was dismissed as too docile to notice, too trusting to resist. Today, she claims her voice, her legacy, and her right to justice. Evelyn's attorney, silver-haired and unflappable, countered by painting the incident as a regrettable misunderstanding among grieving relatives. He suggested that Emily was confused, manipulated by outsiders with their own agendas. But each piece of hard evidence undermined his narrative. When he cautiously tried to undermine Jack's methods, the retired detective took the stand and responded with quietly relentless authority, laying out the lazy cover-ups and paper trails that would condemn Andrea and Evelyn. Andrea testified next. Her composure wavered under cross-examination. What began in haughty self-assurance devolved into self-contradiction the more Felicia pressed. You told your sister you would look after the family funds. Instead, thousands disappeared. Who else had access? Andrea's face flushed. It was business, investments. The judge's frown deepened. So the shell companies in the Caymans were part of your regular business, Miss Madison. In turn, Evelyn faced perhaps the most devastating revelation. Her emails, laid bare by Jack's careful investigation, were read aloud, one coldly discussing the need to minimize Emily's involvement for her own good, another arranging a hush-hush meeting with the family's usual attorney, bypassing Emily entirely. When confronted, Evelyn's legendary poise finally broke. Her excuses sounded hollow, her gaze darting between her co-conspirator and the daughter she'd always underestimated. Throughout the trial, Emily sat composed, even when Andrea's glares burned holes in her resolve. Even as Evelyn tried to catch her eye with pleading looks, she made her own statement, voice steady, recounting not only the specifics of the fraud, but the years of being disregarded and diminished. For so long, I believed I had to accept the respect my family offered, even if it was only for show. But real respect, I now see, is standing up for yourself and for what's right, even if it means standing alone. Witnesses from the Madison estate staff gave quiet, respectful testimony. A longtime housekeeper admitted she'd often seen paperwork shuffled quickly away as Emily approached, and a trusted family accountant confessed his unease about Evelyn's sudden demands for access to sensitive financial documents. The picture formed for the court was clear. Emily had not been paranoid or vindictive. She had been the victim of a calculated deception. Closing arguments swept the courtroom in a crescendo of hard truths and shattered illusions. Felicia didn't mince words. The lesson here is not just about wealth, it's about trust and betrayal. The court's decision will echo far beyond this room. It will define what kind of legacy the Madison name leaves for the future. When the judge finally called for a recess, the courtroom released a collective breath. Outside, the city buzzed with rumors and speculation. Emily waited with Jack and Felicia in an antechamber as the judge weighed the evidence. Her hands trembled only once, when she pulled out her father's old watch, a talisman, a reminder that integrity sometimes meant war. It felt as though hours passed before the verdict was read. The judge's voice rang clear and final. Andrea and Evelyn were guilty of fraud, conspiracy, and misappropriation. The will was to be restored in accordance with William Madison's explicit wishes, and a court-appointed auditor would oversee all remaining family assets for the next decade. Andrea sobbed and collapsed into her seat. Evelyn simply stared ahead, as if stunned that calculation and charm had not, in the end, saved her. Emily felt sorrow, not triumph, a sense of mourning for the family she wished she'd known, and the weighty relief of a war survived. The press frenzy erupted as soon as the doors opened. Shouts of, "Emily, how do you feel?" and "Will you reconcile?" hovered like smoke. But Emily, flanked by Jack and Felicia, walked through it all in silence, her chin high, a symbol not just of victory, but of the strength found in perseverance and truth. Later, on the courthouse steps, Emily paused and looked back at the pillared facade. She knew not every hurt could be put right, and the Madison name would always carry the scars of this public reckoning.
Oh no.
But she had proven to herself
I'm gonna
and the
jail.
world that the trait most overlooked,
Prosecution rests, Your
the
Honor,
quiet
having
fortitude
presented all
of someone
available evidence.
underestimated, could be the very thing that turned history. As cameras flashed and the city's chaos resumed, Emily allowed the first genuine smile to tug at her lips in months. She was no longer the underestimated daughter, shuffling behind her family's glittering parade. She was the survivor who had written her own ending, the awakening of the underestimated. The courthouse doors closed behind Emily Madison with a satisfying hush, as if sealing away the echoes of all the lies, schemes, and whispered contempt that had haunted her for years. The October air was brisk, sunlight fractured by the towering glass and steel of downtown Manhattan. Photographers clustered near the base of the marble stairs, their shutters fluttering like a flock of mechanical birds. But Emily walked through them without so much as a glance. The world, for once, was awed into silence by her steadfast stride. She took a breath, feeling the city's collective gaze pressing against her shoulders, and raised her head. The sense of release was as sharp as the bite of cold on her skin, a liberation that seeped deeper with every step. The Emily who emerged from that courthouse was no longer the invisible daughter skirting the edges of her own life. She was something entirely new, forged in betrayal, but finished in fire. For the first time, Emily understood what true clarity felt like: the pain of the trial, of having to testify against her own flesh and blood, of seeing her family's name dragged through the mud, had stripped away any remaining illusions about love and loyalty. She could no longer hide behind the comforting fictions of childhood or the wishful thinking that had colored her vision for so long. The world was, and would always be, complicated and chaotic. But now, at least, she would meet it on her terms. The press chased her for stories and camera time, their voices rising as she moved past into the bright noon. Emily, what's next for you now? Did you ever expect your own sister and stepmother would betray you? They shouted questions about the fate of the Madison estate, about Evelyn's sentencing and Andrea's public disgrace. But Emily, with practiced ease, allowed the noise to slide over her, catching only the words that mattered. Beside her, Jack walked with a subtle smile, his posture protective, but relaxed. "You handled yourself better than some cops I've worked with," he said once they reached her car. "You didn't back down, even when they tried to twist the story." His praise warmed her, but she shook her head, smiling softly. "I was so scared, Jack. My hands were shaking the entire time. That's what courage looks like, kid. Doing the hard thing anyway." Emily's attorney, Felicia Park, joined them a few moments later, briefing her on what next steps to expect. The court's ruling was just the beginning: audits, asset transfers, and years of public scrutiny. But Felicia's confidence offered Emily a sense of security she hadn't known she craved. They drove back to the Madison brownstone, a place that now felt more like a testimonial to resilience than an oppressive monument to history. Emily wandered through the grand entry, past the somber portraits of ancestors, seeing them with new eyes. The house had lost its chill, the gloom of secrets swept away by the lightness of hard-won justice. She ascended to her father's study and stood by the tall windows, gazing out over the sweep of Central Park. Autumn leaves spun and tumbled in restless gusts. For years, she had watched this view and felt like an outsider, pressed up against the glass between her and the world. Now, she relished the simple power of belonging to herself. Memories of betrayal still stung, Andrea's voice dripping with contempt, Evelyn's calculated affection, the pain of realizing that love, for some, was always conditional. Yet instead of tightening her chest, those memories lent her a strange sense of gratitude. Each dismissal, each condescension, had built her resilience, notch by notch. Emily was not unscathed, but she was unbroken and stronger than even she had ever guessed. In the days that followed, the city buzzed with rumors and gossip columns, filled with half-truths and conjecture. People could not decide whether to see Emily as a tragic victim, a sly strategist, or an unlikely heroine. For her part, Emily refused to let any of those labels define her. She met with auditors and attorneys, made careful arrangements for her own trust, and ensured longtime staff would be cared for during the transition. She wrote private letters to those relatives and friends whose names had been tarnished by association, explaining, apologizing, but always standing firm in her truth. Each morning, she made a ritual of walking in Central Park, blending with the city's tide of joggers, nannies, and business people hustling for subway trains. In that bustling anonymity, she felt whole for the first time in years. Emily realized that the ability to move unseen through the world, a skill forged in the shadows of her own family, was, paradoxically, the source of her greatest power. Where once she felt overlooked, she now saw herself as equipped to observe, to adapt, and to choose her own path. She poured her energy into purposeful learning, enrolling in classes that challenged her, financial literacy, law, even a seminar on charitable endowments. The foundations of the Madison fortune had been built by force and ambition. But Emily was determined to reshape her inheritance into something lasting and good. She spent late nights drafting proposals for a scholarship fund in her father's name and working with nonprofit boards, refusing to let cynicism sour her hope. One evening, as twilight bled over the city, Emily invited Jack and Felicia to dinner, a quiet celebration at her favorite restaurant, tucked down a leafy West Village side street. Over simple food and laughter, they reflected on the storm they'd weathered. Felicia raised her glass, her expression proud and gentle. To the underestimated, may they always have the last word. Felicia toasted. Jack chuckled. Even if that last word is delivered in a courtroom. Emily smiled, the kind of easy, genuine smile she rarely allowed herself before. She realized she no longer needed the world's validation, only her own recognition that she had survived and grown, not in spite of, but because of what she'd endured. As the city's lights ignited in a tapestry of gold and neon, Emily understood the depth of her transformation. The underestimated daughter, once content to linger on the fringes, had uncovered a reservoir of strength within herself. She no longer flinched from confrontation, nor shrank beneath the shadow of others' expectations. When she returned home that night, Emily paused by the window where she'd once pressed her face, aching for connection. Now, she saw possibility instead of limitation, a world of choices unhampered by the ghosts of her past. The future shimmered before her, uncertain but radiant. Emily would not rush to fill the silence left by Andrea in Evelyn's absence. There would be time for forgiveness, perhaps, and for understanding roles shaped by fear and scarcity. But for now, she embraced the clarity that solitude and self-knowledge had brought. Above the restless hum of New York, Emily whispered a promise to herself. Never again would she allow herself to be made invisible, to have her kindness mistaken for frailty. She would be vigilant, compassionate, and fierce in equal measure, and she would never shrink from her story. On the busy, brilliant streets far below, No one paused to mark her reawakening, but Emily felt it with each breath, the steady, unbreakable heart of someone who had once been underestimated
I heard what you
and had
said.
finally learned her own worth.